Okay, let's unpack this. We've got this fascinating stack of sources you sent over articles, some research notes, all about something, well, most of us encounter every single day.
Coffee.
We're taking a deep dive into coffee.
It's amazing, isn't it, how much is actually packed into just this one topic. You've got, like, ancient legends, the actual biology of the plant,
Right.
all the way through to its, massive global economic impact, and even where it might be heading. This material, it really does cover the whole spectrum.
Absolutely. So our mission here with this deep dive is to kind of cut through all that volume and pull out the really important bits, the key knowledge from this material.
Sort of a shortcut.
Exactly. A shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about this, well, incredible drink. Get ready, because there are some surprising facts and ideas here that might just change how you see your next cup. So where else can we possibly start but, right at the beginning?
Makes sense.
And the material points us straight towards Ethiopia, the birthplace of the coffee Arabica plant.
That's right. And like a lot of things with deep roots in the past, its origins are kind of wrapped up in legends.
Ah, the legends.
The most famous one, of course, is Kaldi, the 9th century goat herd.
Oh yeah, Kaldi and the dancing goats, the one where his flock got super energetic after eating these specific berries. It's such a vivid picture.
It is vivid, yeah. But the sources do gently remind us that while everyone repeats that story, this, charming tale, it probably didn't actually appear in writing until way, way later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like around 1671. So it's likely more folklore than actual history.
Yeah.
But it definitely captures that energy coffee gives, right?
True. A good story is a good story. And there's another one too, isn't there? About Sheikh Omar, exiled from Mocha in Yemen.
That's another origin legend. Story goes, he was starving, boiled some berries he found just to survive, and boom, found himself not just fed, but like revitalized.
Huh. Another take on the energy thing.
Pretty much.
Okay, so if we step away from the legends for a sec, what does the material tell us about the first sort of confirmed mentions of coffee?
Well, we see mentions of Al-Razi describing the bean as bunchum and noting it was good for the stomach. And a really key historical source cited is Abd al-Qadir al-Jaziri's work. That's from 1587.
Okay.
He traced coffee's history, documented some early legal debates about it, actually. He confirms, it came from the Abyssinian Yemeni area.
Right.
But he makes it clear that the exact time and the specific reason it was first used, that's still unknown, lost to time.
So we know the where, roughly, but not the when or why. It went from just being a plant to, a drink people wanted.
Exactly.
But once it was discovered and used, the material shows a pretty clear path of how it spread.
Right. From Yemen, it moved north pretty quickly, hit major centers like Istanbul, Cairo, Damascus, got established all across the Near East.
And then, eventually,
Europe.
much later, yeah. The sources say the first coffee house in Europe popped up in Venice. That was 1645.
Venice, okay.
London followed pretty soon after. There's even a mention of a handbill from 1652 advertising coffee for sale there.
Wow, a handbill. Yeah. And Paris wasn't far behind London.
And then from Europe, it seems like colonialism really played a massive role in coffee going global.
Oh, absolutely pivotal. The Dutch, for instance, they were key in spreading cultivation over to Java, late 17th century.
Right, Java.
The French took it to the Caribbean. That's where you get that famous story, maybe another legend, about Gabriel Declue supposedly taking a plant, maybe stealing it, from the royal gardens to Martinique.
Oh, always a story.
And, the British, Spanish, Portuguese empires, they all helped transplant coffee cultivation all around their colonies.
It's fascinating how it got tangled up in all those global power dynamics. And it wasn't just trade, right? The sources mention coffee popping up in some unexpected historical moments.
Yeah, like apparently the American Revolution led some Americans to ditch tea and switch to coffee, sort of a patriotic statement.
Really? Against a tea tax, I guess.
Maybe. And the British Royal Navy, they made a very practical switch in 1807, moved sailors from beer rations to coffee.
Probably kept them more alert and sober.
Much safer at sea, you'd imagine, yeah.
The material also highlights this dramatic shift in Brazil. Around 1830, there was market volatility, and it pushed entrepreneurs there away from gold towards coffee.
And that pivot, It completely transformed Brazil. It drove this huge push for infrastructure. We're talking 7,000 kilometers of railway built between 1860 and 1885.
Just for coffee.
Pretty much specifically to support bringing in the labor needed for these booming coffee farms.
Wow. And that infrastructure then fueled a wave of immigration into Brazil, right?
Yeah.
Especially São Paulo. People from Portugal, Italy, Spain, Germany, even Japan, early 1900s.
Exactly. All this labor plus the railways meant production just exploded. São Paulo went from, 1.2 million bags in 1880 to a staggering 8 million by 1902.
8 million.
Yeah. And by then, coffee wasn't just an export for Brazil, it was the export. Made up something like 63% of their total exports. It completely reshaped their economy, their society.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, so from those really deep historical roots, let's shift to the plant itself. The journey from, the cherry on the tree to that green bean ready for export.
Right. This gets us into the biology and the cultivation side. The material focuses mainly on the two big species, coffee arabica, that's your typical arabica, and coffee canephora, which we know as robusta.
And they grow differently. I mean, what are the key differences?
Pretty significant ones, actually. Arabica is mostly self-pollinating, which means the seedlings tend to be fairly uniform, genetically speaking.
Okay.
Robusta, though, it needs cross-pollination. It's self-incompatible. So if you find a really great Robusta plant, you can't just plant its seeds and expect the same thing. You usually have to propagate it vegetatively, cuttings, grafting, to keep those specific traits.
So Arabica is more consistent from seed.
Right.
Robusta needs more hands-on work for specific types. And Robusta sounds like, the robust one.
Yeah,
Tough.
it is, generally. Robusta is less susceptible to diseases compared to Arabica. Plus, it thrives in warmer, lower altitudes that are just too harsh for the more delicate Arabica. That natural hardiness was really important for its spread.
Where did Robusta actually come into the picture, historically speaking?
The material says it was first collected back in 1890 from the Congo region.
Congo, okay.
From there, it went to Brussels, then over to Java, and that really kicked off its cultivation on plantations worldwide. Its resistance, especially against things like coffee leaf rust, which just devastated Arabica.
Yeah.
That was a huge deal.
Right, the diseases. Speaking of origins, let's circle back to Ethiopia today. How does it fit into the global coffee scene now?
Oh, Ethiopia is still a major player. It's the world's 5th largest producer overall and number 1 in Africa. Put out nearly 500,000 tons in 2022.
Wow.
And the sources estimate over 4 million small-scale farmers are involved there. It's huge.
And surprisingly, a lot of that coffee stays right there in Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Almost half the coffee grown in Ethiopia is actually consumed domestically.
Oh.
Ethiopia leads Africa in domestic coffee consumption. It just shows how deeply ingrained it is in daily life, in the local culture and economy. Exports obviously go to the EU, East Asia, North America, but a lot of the production still uses very traditional methods, almost all the work done by hand.
So it's this mix of ancient practices and modern global trade. The material mentioned different types of Ethiopian coffee, based on how they're grown.
Right, you've got forest coffees, which come from wild trees, then garden coffees grown sort of around homesteads, and plantation coffees from larger, more managed farms.
And the Kaffa region sounded particularly important.
Absolutely. Kaffa coffee is named after that specific region, which is literally considered the birthplace of the Arabica plant. It still grows wild there in the forests at pretty high elevations, 1,400 to 2,100 meters.
Okay, so we have the plant, it's home, but getting those cherries harvested sounds like it's not easy. The sources really highlight this constant battle with pests and diseases.
It's a huge challenge, an ongoing fight. The material notes over 900 different insect species are considered pests for coffee plants.
900.
Yeah. And key fungal threats include coffee leaf rust that one hammers Arabica leaves, and it's found pretty much everywhere coffee grows now. Then there's coffee wilt disease in eastern and central Africa that can actually kill the whole tree. And American leaf spot in Latin America makes those little holes in the leaves.
And there was one insect pest that sounded particularly nasty.
Ah, yes. The coffee borer beetle, Hypothenemus hampe. The sources call it the single most damaging insect pest worldwide.
Real?
It can destroy 50% or even more of the berries on a tree. It bores right into the cherry, lays its eggs inside. The larvae grew up in there, mate. Basically ruins the bean before it even gets going.
That's devastating. How do farmers even manage something like that?
Well, early attempts with just mass spraying of insecticides often backfired pretty badly. Killed off the natural predators of the pests too, wiped out the good guys with the bad. So the approach now is more towards integrated pest management, IPM.
Okay, what's that involve?
More targeted treatments, managing the environment to make it less friendly for pests, that kind of thing.
And there was that really surprising note about birds helping out.
Yes, I thought that was fascinating. Turns out birds can be major allies. There were studies mentioned in Costa Rican plantations showing that American yellow warblers and rufous-capped warblers, they reduced the number of coffee borers by 50%.
Wow, nature fighting back.
Exactly.
But beyond pests, there's another huge threat looming: climate change. The sources are pretty blunt about its impact, especially somewhere like Ethiopia.
It's a serious, almost existential challenge for coffee. Rising temperatures are directly linked to more pests and diseases spreading.
Right.
The sources also point to more unpredictable weather longer, harsher dry seasons, less reliable rain, and dramatic forest loss, often connected to climate impacts, hurts too, because coffee often needs that forest shade and microclimate.
And the potential hit to the actual yield, the amount of coffee produced.
It's alarming. The material suggests climate change could slash coffee yields by as much as 70%.
70.
Yeah, which really underscores how urgent adaptation is. Things like moving farms higher up, irrigation, managing shade, using mulch, terracing, careful pruning, all becoming crucial.
And while we're talking challenges, there's that note in the sources about the human cost, right at the start of this chain.
Yeah, there was one piece from a Reddit source that really puts it starkly. It highlighted that a farm's entire annual production might only bring in something like $3,000 total.
Total. For the whole year.
Yeah, and split between at least 2 people working the farm. The source noted that was way less than the average wage back in 2012. It's just a tough reminder of the often really precarious economic reality for the farmers growing the beans we enjoy every day.
Yeah, a vital point to keep in mind. Okay, so once those cherries are picked, they go through pre-processing to become the green bean. What does that involve?
Right, this is where you get the fruit off the seed, often done by machine now pulping the cherry to get the seeds out. Then there's a fermentation step.
Fermentation, why?
To break down this slimy layer, it's called mucilage, that still clings to the seeds after pulping. Once that's broken down, the residue is washed off. And the sources do point out this washing process can create massive amounts of wastewater. That can be a big environmental problem.
Okay, so pulped, fermented, washed, then drying.
Drying is absolutely crucial. Got to get the moisture content right to prevent mold and spoilage. The materials suggest drying tables are really the best method, especially for quality coffee.
Drying tables.
Yeah, basically raised beds where the beans are spread thinly. Air circulates all around them, and they're mixed by hand to dry evenly. Very common in Africa, and it's making a comeback elsewhere too.
What about tricky climates? High humidity.
In those areas, sometimes they use heated air blown through rotating cylinders to dry the beans. But the end result of all this pre-processing, that's your green coffee bean, stable and ready to be shipped.
So we've got our green beans. Dried, sorted. Now the next step is where the real magic happens, right?
Yeah.
Processing and brewing.
Exactly. And the key transformation, before it gets anywhere near your cup, is roasting. Green beans are usually roasted much closer to where they'll be consumed, not typically at the origin farm.
Okay.
And roasting changes the bean dramatically, physically and chemically. It loses weight because moisture evaporates, but it puffs up, increases in volume quite a lot, becomes less dense.
And that change creates the different roast profiles we see. Light, dark, medium.
Yes. The material describes darker roasts as generally bolder, maybe simpler in flavor. They've lost more fiber, developed more sugary notes through the roasting process.
Right.
Lighter roasts, on the other hand, they tend to be more complex. They hold on to more of those delicate aromatic oils and acids that get destroyed by longer, hotter roasting.
What about caffeine? Does roasting change the caffeine level?
This is a common point of confusion. Roasting itself doesn't actually change the total amount of caffeine in one single bean, but because the beans expand so much when roasted, if you measure your coffee by volume, like with a scoop, you'll physically fit fewer roasted beans in that scoop compared to green beans.
I see.
So a scoop of dark roast beans, which are bigger and lighter, will actually have slightly less caffeine than the same scoop filled with lighter roast beans, just because there are fewer beans in there.
Got it. So volume measurement is key there.
Exactly. Roasting also produces chaff. That's the papery skin that comes off the bean. Usually removed, though sometimes a little bit is added back into really dark roast to help absorb oils on the surface.
Okay, so roasted beans, how do you keep them fresh? Keep that flavor locked in.
Storage is crucial. The sources hammer this point. Use an airtight container, ceramic, glass or non-reactive metal are best.
Why non-reactive?
So it doesn't impart any weird tastes. And keep it away from moisture, heat, light, and especially strong smells. Coffee beans are like little sponges. They'll absorb odors from nearby food.
Good tip. And the fridge. Good or bad?
Bad, according to the material. Specifically advises against storing coffee in the fridge because of moisture issues. Freezer maybe, if sealed perfectly, but countertop in an airtight container is usually best for beans you'll use soon.
Okay, no fridge. Noted. There was a big breakthrough in storage that really changed things globally, wasn't there?
Yes, huge. Vacuum packing. Introduced back in 1931.
Wow, that early.
Yeah. It allowed roasted coffee to be sealed in cans with like 99% of the air removed. Kept it fresh pretty much indefinitely until you broke the seal. That technology is basically standard now for mass market coffee worldwide.
So beans roasted, maybe vacuum packed, finally ready for the last step, brewing.
Right. And brewing is essentially about extraction, isn't it? You're trying to pull the desirable flavors out of the ground beans using hot water, but without pulling out too many of the bitter compounds.
A balancing act.
Definitely. And it's influenced by loads of factors. How fine you grind the beans, the water temperature, the ratio of coffee grounds to water, any flavorings you might add, and crucially, how you separate the grounds from the final liquid coffee.
And the material got pretty specific about temperatures.
It did. Said optimal extraction, getting the best flavor, happens when the water's between 91 and 96 degrees Celsius.
So just off the boil, that's about 196 to 205 Fahrenheit.
Exactly. Then, for holding brewed coffee, like in a pot, the ideal range is lower. 85 to 88 Celsius, maybe up to 93. That's roughly 185 to 190, up to 199 Fahrenheit. Keeps it hot, but stops it from tasting stewed or burnt.
And for actually drinking it.
Even cooler. The sweet spot for serving is apparently 68 to 79 Celsius, or 154 to 174 Fahrenheit. Hot, but not scalding.
Different temps for extraction, holding, serving. Makes sense. And there are just so many ways to actually make the coffee.
Oh yeah, the material lists quite a few. Your standard drip coffee maker, the French press, the old school percolator.
My grandma had one of those.
Right. Then there's cold brew, which is totally different because it uses no heat at all, just time.
Yeah.
And of course, espresso.
Let's zoom in on espresso. It feels like the foundation for half the coffee drinks out there now.
It really is. And the name itself tells you something. Comes from the Italian esprimere.
Meaning?
To express. Or to force out. Which is exactly what it is. Forcing a small amount of very hot water under high pressure through finely ground coffee creates that concentrated shot, usually with that layer of crema on top.
And the person making these drinks, the expert behind the counter.
That's the barista. That's the modern term, yeah, for someone specializing in coffee beverages, usually in a coffee house setting. In Italy, apparently, it's a really respected profession. It takes years of training.
Right.
And the specialty coffee scene has really embraced that idea of skill and precision, but also, creativity.
Creativity like latte art. The sources even gave us a bit of history on that.
Yeah, David Schomer in Seattle,
Oh.
credited with pioneering the modern style starting around 1988.
What was his idea?
He'd researched in Italy and came back thinking espresso making was this culinary art form that was kind of misunderstood or maybe underdeveloped in the US back then. He wanted to elevate it.
And how do they do it? Create those little ferns and hearts.
Well, the material describes the basics. You need really well-steamed milk, that tight microfoam. Then it's about the pour, a controlled, sometimes vibrating pour from the pitcher. And maybe using the stream of milk itself or a tool to sort of slice through the foam in espresso as it mixes, creating those patterns. Rosettes, hearts, tulips.
Takes practice, I bet.
Definitely. Beyond just espresso or lattes, what other drinks came up in the sources? Any interesting ones?
Yeah, there's cafe glacé coffee with gelato. Sounds pretty good.
Coffee ice cream, yeah.
Cappuccino, obviously espresso. Steamed milk, foam. The material noted using cold, fresh milk is key. Steamed to around 125, 130 Fahrenheit for that perfect texture.
Right, temperature matters for milk foam.
And then some more unusual examples, like a chocolate caramel latte or a white mocha that apparently had orange zest in it. Shows how creative people get.
Orange zest. Okay, yeah, definitely getting creative.
It really is this huge global journey, isn't it? From a tree somewhere across the world to these really complex specific drinks. Let's pull back now and look at coffee's massive global reach and maybe what the future holds.
Okay, yeah, coffee is absolutely one of the world's major commodities. Huge global trade. In 2023, world production hit 11 million tons.
11 million tons.
Yeah. Brazil leads the pack by far, 31% of that total. Vietnam is number 2. And it's mostly traded as those green beans we talked about on the big commodity markets.
And the economic footprint, especially somewhere like the U.S., is just enormous, right?
It's staggering when you look at the numbers. The sources say coffee is America's favorite drink after tap water. 2/3 of adults drink it daily.
Wow.
And the total economic impact in the U.S. In 2022, it was over $343 billion. Billion. With a B, supports over 2.2 million jobs, generates over $100 billion in wages every year.
And a key point there is how much value gets added after the green beans arrive.
Exactly. Since the U.S. imports almost all its coffee, every dollar's worth of imported green beans is estimated to create something like $43 in value within the U.S. economy.
Wow.
Through all the steps that happen here. Roasting, grinding, packaging, distribution, retail, cafes, everything. U.S. consumers spend over $300 million on coffee products every single day.
$300 million a day? That's mind-blowing.
It's an incredible flow of money.
And beyond the pure economics, coffee is just so woven into society and culture everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Coffee houses themselves have this incredibly long, rich history. It goes back over 500 years. The first one supposedly opened in Constantinople way back in 1475.
Why?
And there have been these important social hubs, places for discussion, intellectual exchange throughout history, played a big role in Bosnian culture, for example, according to the sources.
And then there's that very modern, maybe distinctively American phenomenon, the coffee break.
Yes. The material traces the actual term coffee break to an ad campaign in 1952, Pan American Coffee Bureau.
So the name is marketing.
The name, yeah. But there's also that intriguing story, maybe origins myth, crediting the idea to an Osmund Gunderson in Wisconsin.
What's the story there?
Apparently, he hired Norwegian wives to sort tobacco and agreed they needed breaks during the day to go home, do chores, and crucially, have coffee. So the practice might be older than the term.
So the marketing latched on to something already happening. Makes sense. It seems coffee wasn't always loved everywhere, though.
That's true. It's faced its share of pushback, periods of prohibition, condemnation, both in some Islamic cultures historically and parts of Europe, too. Often concerns about the stimulant effect or the kinds of discussions happening in coffee houses.
Right, seen as maybe subversive.
Sometimes, yeah. And it's even inspired folklore and art.
Like what?
Well, there's that fascinating Oromo belief that coffee trees first grew from a god's tears shed on the graves of sorcerers.
Wow.
And the composer Bach even wrote a whole humorous piece, the Coffee Cantata, basically poking fun at coffee addiction or dependence.
Even back. Okay, one bit of coffee trivia that always comes up. Cup of Joe. Where does that actually come from?
The eternal question. The sources explore the usual suspects. There's that popular story about Josephus Daniels, the U.S. Navy Secretary, banning alcohol on ships in WWI, leaving coffee as the strongest drink, hence Cup of Joe.
But is that true?
Probably not. The sources say it's likely apocryphal. The story seems to appear much later than the term itself.
Okay, so what else?
Other theories include it being a shortened version of jamoke, which was supposedly a slang term for coffee combining Java and mocha.
Jamoke, okay.
Or maybe the simplest explanation. It just meant the common drink of the average Joe, the everyday person's drink, the real origin. Still kind of a mystery.
It's funny how those things stick around.
Okay.
Okay, shifting slightly, let's touch on the health notes that were gathered from the material.
Sure. Well, the basics are confirmed. Caffeine is a psychoactive chemical, a stimulant mostly processed by the liver. The material also points out coffee contains other compounds like MAOIs, specifically things called B-carbolines and harmane that might add to its psychoactive effects. That's interesting.
And antioxidants. We always hear about antioxidants in coffee.
Yeah, it does contain polyphenols like chlorogenic acid. But the sources were pretty explicit here. There's currently no solid evidence that these provide actual health or antioxidant benefits after we ingest and digest them.
So potential is there, but proof of benefit in the body isn't clear yet? What about general safety? How much is okay?
Generally, consuming around 3 to 4 cups a day, which is about 300-400 milligrams of caffeine, is considered safe for most healthy adults.
But there are some potential flags.
Yeah, the sources mention potential increased risks suggested by some studies for women regarding bone fractures and for pregnant women regarding issues like fetal loss or low birth weight. But it's really emphasized that these studies often have limitations or the results are complex to interpret definitively. More research needed, basically.
Okay, and what about that? well-known effect coffee has on some people's digestion.
Yes. The laxative effect, the sources confirm it's real for some individuals, can happen quite quickly too, sometimes within minutes of drinking coffee.
Do we know why?
Intriguingly, no. The specific mechanism isn't well understood, and caffeine itself probably isn't the main driver. Still a bit of a puzzle.
And quickly, what about mushroom coffee? That's a trend now.
The material mentions it, yeah. Notes it usually has about half the caffeine of regular coffee, but it also flags potential downsides, digestive upset for some, and maybe liver toxicity concerns if consumed in really high amounts.
And the claimed benefits.
Crucially, the sources say there's very little good clinical evidence right now to back up specific health or cognitive benefit claims for mushroom coffee. Mostly marketing hype at this point.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears and look ahead. The insights from Euromonitor and the sources paint a really interesting picture of coffee's future.
Yeah, a key takeaway is that global demand just keeps growing,
Yep.
especially for higher quality specialty beans. But climate change remains this huge shadow hanging over the traditional supply chains we've relied on for centuries. It's a major threat.
The material talks about this wave model of coffee culture.
Yeah.
We had the third wave focusing on quality, sourcing, the cafe experience, and now we're moving into a fourth wave.
That's the idea. And the fourth wave is described as being less tied to a specific physical place, like a cafe,
How so?
thanks to technology, delivery apps, better homebrewing gear, and maybe shifts from the pandemic.
Yeah.
You can increasingly get really good coffee basically anywhere, anytime. The sources even mention concepts like cafes in the metaverse.
Seriously, virtual cafes.
Apparently, existing alongside, the physical cafes, which still serve that important third place role, but maybe defined a bit differently.
And they even hinted at a potential fifth wave.
Yeah, the sources suggested this could involve something really disruptive, maybe the end of traditional supply chains as we know them, driven either by climate necessity or maybe new technologies.
Wow. Okay, so if demand is rising, but traditional supply is shaky, what solutions are being looked at? Where will future coffee come from?
Well, breeding new coffee varieties more resilient, disease-resistant, maybe drought-tolerant strains, that's highlighted as a top strategy.
Makes sense.
What else? There's talk of beanless coffee, plant-based alternatives designed to mimic coffee, though the sources note they kind of lack the traditional appeal right now.
Beanless coffee. No.
And then there's lab cultivation, growing coffee cells or maybe even full beans in bioreactors. That's seen as potentially key to filling future demand gaps if farming gets too difficult or expensive.
Lab-grown coffee. Wild. Also, shifts towards dairy alternatives in drinks are mentioned as part of these evolving sourcing trends.
Where are the big market opportunities globally right now, according to the sources?
Coffee shop spending is still growing strong pretty much everywhere. Emerging markets look particularly interesting, places like Brazil, just because of its huge size and evolving coffee culture, and China, which is seen as having massive untapped potential.
And the U.S. The U.S. gets called out specifically as the epicenter of the global cold revolution.
Cold revolution.
Yeah, driving trends like iced coffee, cold brew, ready-to-drink cold coffee products. That's a huge growth area. Pods, like K-cups, are still growing but showing signs of maturing, especially in Europe.
And the industry itself, the big companies.
The sources noted that a big wave of consolidation, companies buying each other up, seems to have ended. Now you've got a few really large global players dominating much of the market.
What about functional coffee? Adding things for specific effects.
Energy is still the main thing people want from coffee, obviously, but that demand is splintering. You've got people wanting ultra-caffeinated options, others wanting smoother, more controlled energy, maybe less jitteriness.
Interesting, especially with rising anxiety levels.
Right. It's happening against this backdrop of more anxiety, sleep issues in society. But interestingly, the sources say there hasn't been a major anti-caffeine backlash yet.
And the next big thing in functional coffee, nootropics. Substances claimed to boost brain function. That's tipped as potentially the next great coffee functionality.
Brain-boosting coffee.
Okay.
It sounds like the very definition of coffee is getting fuzzier.
It absolutely is. Category blurring, they call it. New products are crossing traditional lines all the time. You see partnerships between coffee brands and alcohol companies or soft drink makers creating these plus coffee segments.
Like coffee-flavored energy drinks or coffee cocktails.
Exactly. Targeting specific drinking occasions is also creating new niches, like premium single serve. And coffee mixed with alcohol is specifically mentioned as a potent mix generating market excitement.
And single serve isn't just about pods anymore.
No, as the pod market matures, the expectation is for a much more diverse, single-serve landscape, catering to different tastes, quality levels, and occasions.
Finally, what about just coffee trends, styles?
The prediction is that trend-specific origins, roast levels, brew methods that become popular will likely cycle in and out of fashion much faster in the future. More like the fashion industry. Wow, okay. We have really journeyed, haven't we? From ancient Ethiopian forests and those